this video we're going to take a trip down to London to follow in the footsteps of the Victorian era's most famous novelist and explore a few of the side streets that you wouldn't normally see. Before we get to one of the houses that the author lived in, let me tell you a little history about him. So Charles Dickens was born Charles John Huffman Dickens on February the 7th, 1812 in Portsmouth on the southern coast of England. The famed British author was the second of 8 children. His father, John Dickens, was a naval clerk who dreamed of striking it rich. Charles's mother, Elizabeth Barrow, aspired to be a teacher and school director. Despite his parents' best efforts, the family remained poor. Nevertheless, they were happy in the early days. In 1816, they moved to Chatham in Kent, where young Dickens and his siblings were free to roam the countryside and explore the old castle at Rochester. In 1822, the Dickens family moved to Camden Town, a poor neighbourhood in London. By then, the family's financial situation had grown dire, as John Dickens had a habit of living beyond the family's means. Eventually, John was sent to prison for debt in 1824, when Charles was just 12 years old. Following his father's imprisonment, Dickens was forced to leave school to work at a boot blacking factory alongside the River Thames. At the run-down, rodent-ridden factory, Dickens earned 6 shillings a week, labelling pots of blacking, a substance used to clean fireplaces. It was the best he could do to support his family. Looking back on the experience, Dickens saw it as the moment he said goodbye to his youthful innocence, stating that he wondered how he could be so easily cast away at such a young age. He felt abandoned and betrayed by the adults who were supposed to take care of him. These sentiments would later become recurring themes in his writing. Much to his relief, he was permitted to go back to school when his father received a family inheritance and used it to pay off his debts. But when Dickens was 15, his education was pulled out from under him once again. In 1827, he had to drop out of school and work as an office boy to contribute to his family's income. As it turned out, the job became a launching point for his writing career. Dickens married Catherine Hogarth soon after his first book, Sketches by Boz, was published. The couple had 10 children. During the 1850s, Dickens suffered 2 devastating losses: the deaths of his daughter and his father. He also separated from his wife in 1858. Dickens slandered Catherine publicly and struck up an intimate relationship with a young actress named Ellen Ternan, known as Nellie. Sources differ on whether the two started seeing each other before or after Dickens' marital separation. It is also believed that he went to great lengths to erase any documentation alluding to Ternan's presence in his life. Throughout his career, Dickens published a total of 15 novels. On this walk, we will visit London locations that Dickens knew and inspired his works. The Charles Dickens Museum at 48 Doughty Street was Dickens's home from April 1837 to December 1839. It opened as a museum in June 1925. Charles and Catherine Dickens had been married for 1 year when they moved here with their baby son Charlie. During their residence, 2 daughters were born, Mary in March 1838 and Katie in October 1839. On the 7th of May 1837, the idyll was shattered in a way that would affect him personally and professionally for the rest of his life. His beloved sister-in-law Mary Hogarth collapsed in the early hours of the morning. Doctors later diagnosed heart failure, and she died later that afternoon in Dickens's arms. Here Dickens completed Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist, wrote Nicholas Nickleby and Memoirs of Grimaldi, and began work on what became Barnaby Rudge. Despite his glittering social circle of admiring guests and friends, he was close to poverty, crime, the law, the abandoned and neglected child, and the prison. They were images from which he could never escape, and they constitute a powerful part of the world of contrasts and extremes that is so much Dickens's London. This area is known as Mount Pleasant, and it's used by Dickens for irony as the home of the Smallweed family in Bleak House. It's described as always solitary, shady and sad, closely bricked in on all sides like a tomb. Here on Farringdon Road we see the vast post office complex established here in 1900. If Dickens had stood in this spot he would have seen the Middlesex House of Correction or Coalbath Fields Prison, which was on this site from 1794. When it closed in 1877 it housed 1,500 prisoners and the site was transferred to the post office in 1889. Now stood on Farringdon Road, which follows the course of the River Fleet, one of London's underground rivers since 1766. The construction of Farringdon Road in 1845 cut through some of London's most infamous slums, and in 1863 the Metropolitan Railway came into the area. This modern pub, named after David Copperfield's aunt, the Betsy Trotwood, reminds visitors that the Dickensian associations in this area are strong. On the other side of the road is Pear Tree Court, thought to be the site Dickens had in mind for where Oliver Twist sees the artful dodger and Charlie Bates pick Mr. Brownlow's pocket. Clerkenwell Green was originally a green space in a semi-rural village. Very few vestiges remain of the green. The cattle trough acts as a reminder that this area was en route to Smithfield Meat Market, and cattle would be driven through the streets to sale and slaughter there. The Clerkenwell Sessions House features in Oliver Twist as the destination of Mr. Bumble the Beadle's visit to the city. Hatton Gardens is now well known for expensive jewellery businesses. Dickens knew this area as one of poverty and crime. It is at number 54 Hatton Garden that Dickens sets the police office and magistrates' court run by Mr. Fang in Oliver Twist, where Oliver is brought after allegedly picking Mr. Brownlow's pocket. The location is chosen partly because one A.S. Lang had such a court in Hatton Garden. Lang's reputation for cruelty and harshness moved Dickens to visit his court in order to see him at work. If Hatton Garden was bad, then Saffron Hill was a great deal worse. This is what used to be known as Field Lane. Field Lane was the last section of Saffron Hill leading into Holborn and was cleared in the Holborn Viaduct development, but the whole area in Dickens's time was one of great squalor, poverty, misery and crime, and most horrifying of all, child crime. This is the Wonton Inn at the end of Saffron Hill, said to be the inspiration for the Three Cripples public house in Oliver Twist. Cowcroft Street was originally called Cowcroft Street, where animals were kept awaiting transfer to Smithfield. current meat market building was opened in 1868 and has had a number of later additions. It replaced the previous open-air cattle market which had stood here since the 12th century and closed in 1855. By the 1850s, the market had become a scandal and Dickens contributed to the debate about its future. Despite strong opposition to its closure, the Smithfield Market Removal Act was passed in 1852 and the sale and slaughter of beasts was moved out of the city. Dickens describes the conditions in the old market in both Oliver Twist and Great Expectations. Newgate Prison stood on the corner of Old Bailey and Newgate Street from 1188 to 1902. Old Bailey stands on this site. Newgate Prison was burnt down in the Gordon Riots in 1780, described by Dickens in Barnaby Rudge, and then rebuilt between 1780 and 1783. Between 1783 and 1868, public executions took place outside in Newgate Street. Dickens campaigned powerfully for executions to be taken inside the prison walls and was still alive when the legislation requiring this was passed in 1868. Central Criminal Court originally occupied buildings towards the south end of Old Bailey, and Dickens set several memorable trial scenes here: Fagin in Oliver Twist, Magwitch in Great Expectations, Charles Darnay in A Tale of Two Cities. The building erected in 1902 on the Newgate site used some of the stones from the demolished prison as building material at street level. Dickens was fascinated by prisons all through his life and career. One of the earliest essays in Sketches by Boz was a visit to Newgate, which testifies to this fascination, and in Oliver Twist he describes Fagin's last night alive in Newgate. The Viaduct Tavern was opened in 1869 and was named after the Holborn Viaduct, which was opened the same year. It is the last remaining example of a 19th century gin palace left in the city and has been beautifully decorated in keeping with its history. The original toll booth is still in situ. Apparently the pub was so rough the landlord had to sell beer tokens from the booth to the customers to keep money away from his bar staff. The immediate location surrounding the Viaduct Tavern is steeped in history. It is situated just across the street from the present Old Bailey, which is built on the site of the old Newgate Prison. The exact spot where many executions were held from Newgate Prison, now marked with a small fountain, is visible from every window in the property. Some reports say the pub is also built on the site of Newgate Prison or the old Giltspur Street Comptoir, a debtors' prison in use between 1700 and 1853. There are cells down in the cellars, and these are believed to be condemned cells where prisoners would spend the night before their execution. St Sepulchre's Church stands on Holborn Viaduct facing Old Bailey. It was the bell from this church which rang at 8 o'clock in the morning to signal executions were to take place, a fact Dickens observed in Oliver Twist. Before public hangings moved here in 1783, the route taken by condemned criminals to Tyburn went past the church. It is also said that a tunnel went from the church to the cells at the Viaduct Tavern, then over to Newgate Prison, so the priest could deliver the last rites and then head over to the prison without having to walk through the crowds of spectators. St Bartholomew's Hospital was founded in 1123 and is the oldest hospital in London still on its original site. The medical school opened in 1662. Dickens mentions it in Pickwick Papers and in Martin Chuzzlewit, in which Betsy Prigg, the nursing colleague of Sarah Gamp, is based. This is Cock Lane, site of the Fortune of War public house, demolished in 1910, but marked with a memorial. It was in an upper room here that corpses, either executed criminals or the work of grave robbers or resurrection men, like Jerry Cruncher in A Tale of Two Cities, were made available for surgeons from St Bartholomew's Hospital for dissection. Little Britain, no, not that one, is a long and winding street by the hospital and is the location in Great Expectations for the lawyer Mr. Jaggers. This amazing building that looks like it should be in Brussels or somewhere is the Guildhall. Guildhall is the setting for the trial for breach of promise in Pickwick Papers. The Guildhall figures significantly in Master Humphrey's Clock and recur in one of Dickens's finest essays, Gone Astray, where he imagines himself as a child wandering through the city, like a child in a dream. As the centre of the government of the City of London, Guildhall was often the target for Dickens's criticism of the activities of those to whom the responsibility was entrusted. Mansion House is the home of the Lord Mayor of the City of London. Designed by George Dance, it was begun in 1739. In Gone Astray, Dickens imagines himself coming here when a dinner is being prepared and looks in through the kitchen window, and my heart began to beat with hope that the Lord Mayor or the Lady Mayoress would look out of an upper apartment and direct me to be taken in, but nothing of that kind occurred. Three notable streets radiate from Mansion House: Threadneedle Street, Cornhill and Lombard Street. Royal Exchange, frequently referred to in his novels, stands at the top of Cornhill. Cheapside was, in the 19th century, an enormously important shopping area. It is still a busy thoroughfare and is now a major retail destination again, with one new chain shopping centre at the St Paul's End. Cheapside figures throughout the history of English literature and makes numerous appearances in Dickens's writing. In Master Humphrey's Clock, Dickens describes Master Humphrey going to the top of St Paul's Cathedral, then the tallest building in London, for the panoramic city view. He writes, "Draw but a little circle above the clustering housetops, and you shall have within its space everything with its opposite extreme and contradiction close beside." In St Paul's churchyard stands the re-erected Temple Bar, which formerly stood between Fleet Street and the Strand, marking the boundary of the City of London. It had become a great obstacle to the movement of traffic and was demolished in 1878. In Bleak House, Dickens described it as a leaden-headed old obstruction and drew unfavourable comparisons between it and the activities of the City of London Corporation. Temple Bar was finally returned to the Square Mile in 2004 by the City of London Corporation, the Temple Bar Trust and several livery companies. This amazing space is Paternoster Square, and it's owned by the Mitsubishi Estate Company, next to St Paul's Cathedral in the City of London. The area, which takes its name from Paternoster Row, once centre of the London publishing trade, was devastated by aerial bombardment in the Blitz during the Second World War. It is now the location of the London Stock Exchange, which relocated there from Threadneedle Street in 2004. It is also the location of investment banks such as Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch and Nomura Securities Company, and a fund manager, Fidelity Investments. The square itself, i.e. the plaza, is privately owned public space. The main monument in the redeveloped square is the 75-foot tall Paternoster Square column. It is a Corinthian column of Portland stone topped by a gold leaf covered flaming copper urn, which is illuminated by fibre optic lighting at night. The column was designed by William Whitfield's firm, Whitfield Partners, and also serves as a ventilation shaft for a service road that runs beneath the square. We're now crossing the Holborn Viaduct, whose construction wiped out a large area of the city, including Field Lane. Field Lane is where Fagin's den was located in Oliver Twist. Dickens describes the area as you come out of the city, a narrow and dismal alley. Confined as the limits of Field Lane are, it has its barber, its coffee shop, its beer shop, and its fried fish warehouse. It is a commercial colony of itself, the emporium of petty larceny, visited at early morning and setting in of dusk by silent merchants who traffic in dark back parlours and go as strangely as they come. Here the clothes man, the shoe vamper and the rag merchant display their goods as signboards to the petty thief, and stores of old iron and bones, and heaps of mildewy fragments of woolen stuff and linen rust and rot in the grimy cellars. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with filthy odours. There appeared to be heaps of children who, even at that time of night, were crawling in and out at the doors or screaming from the inside. The sole places that seemed to prosper amid the general blight of the place were the public houses, and in them the lowest orders of Irish were wrangling with might and main. Covered ways and yards, which here and there diverged from the main street, disclosed little knots of houses where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth. Oliver was just considering whether he hadn't better run away when they reached the bottom of the hill. His conductor, catching him by the arm, pushed open the door of a house near Field Lane, and drawing him into the passage, closed it behind them. All this was soon to become a thing of the past, 1844 ushered in efforts to rebuild the area, and 1869 saw the construction of the Holborn Viaduct. We're now opposite St Andrew's, Holborn. Bill Sykes and Oliver Twist paused to look up at the clock of the church as they set out to rob the house at Chancery. Taking a time check on the clock, Sykes says to Oliver, "It's hard upon 7. You must step out." The name Holborn commemorates the long-vanished Holborn stream, a tributary of the River Fleet. In the 18th century, the road was lined with coaching inns. The inns were demolished after the growth of the railways in the mid-19th century made their prime purpose redundant. The road's only relic of the pre-industrial age is the late 16th century Staple Inn, one of London's few surviving timber-frame buildings. It dates from 1576, although it had to be pieced back together following considerable damage in World War II. It is so named because it once provided London accommodation for wool staplers or brokers. Behind the most ancient part of Holborn wrote Dickens in his last and unfinished novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, where certain gabled houses some centuries of age still stand looking on the public way, is a little nook called Staple Inn. It is one of those nooks, the turning into which, out of the clashing street, imparts to the relieved pedestrian the sensation of having just put cotton in his ears and velvet soles on his boots. Despite the changes that have taken place in the area since Dickens's day, as you stand in this little slice of bygone London, you get the genuine sensation that you have literally stepped back in time. Barnard's Inn is a former inn of Chancery. It is now the home of Gresham College, an institution of higher learning established in 1597 that hosts public lectures. It was here that Pip and Herbert Pocket had chambers and great expectations. In 1454 it was established as an inn of Chancery. We will talk about inns throughout this walk. The 9 inns of Chancery, Barnard's Inn, Clement's Inn, Clifford's Inn, Furnival's Inn, Lyon's Inn, New Inn, Staple Inn, Strand Inn and Favy's Inn, were institutions involved in running Chancery law relating to public records and archives, that came to be used for training barristers for the Inns of Court, which were Gray's Inn, Lincoln's Inn and the Inner and Middle Temple. Each of the inns was run as a miniature version of the Inns of Court, with a hall and chambers but no chapel. By the 19th century, their functions had mostly been assumed by the Law Society and they soon closed, almost all the buildings being demolished towards the end of the century, but their names live on in the titles of nearby streets. The fact that so many enclaves in this area are referred to as inns when they are in fact places of business can be somewhat confusing. Evidently Dickens also found this a little perplexing, for he has Pip ruminate upon the fact when he first visits Barnard's Inn. I had supposed the establishment to be a hotel kept by Mr. Barnard, whereas I now find Barnard to be a disembodied spirit, or a fiction, and is in the dingiest collection of shabby buildings ever squeezed together, in a rank corner as a club for tomcats. Either Dickens was being a little harsh in his criticism, or the area has changed considerably since his day. We're now entering the area called Lincoln's Inn. Lincoln's Inn, along with the 3 other Inns of Court, is recognised as being one of the world's most prestigious professional bodies of judges and lawyers. Lincoln's Inn is the largest inn, covering 11 acres. It was here that Bleak House began with its vivid images of a London fog. The old hall dates from at least 1489, when it replaced the smaller Bishop's Hall. Between 1924 and 1927, Sir John Simpson dismantled the entire hall, straightening warped timbers, removing the plaster, placing any unserviceable sections, and then putting the entire hall back together. It was reopened on the 22nd of November 1928 by Queen Mary. From 1737 onward, it was used to house the Court of Chancery, a practice that ended with the opening of the Royal Courts of Justice. This is where in Bleak House the legal suit of Jarndyce versus Jarndyce droned ever onwards, just as it had been doing for so long that no man alive could remember what it was originally about. The first mention of a chapel in Lincoln's Inn comes from 1428. By the 17th century this had become too small, and discussions started about building a new one in 1608. The current chapel was built between 1620 and 1623 by Inigo Jones. We're inside Lincoln's Inn Gardens. Miss Flight, a possible heir in the Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, and a character whose entire life revolves around the case, observes of this garden, "I call it my garden. It is quite a bower in the summertime." The curious little building of red brick and stone that gives the appearance of being a mini fortress is in fact the garden's shed, and is known in the inn as the head gardener's castle. The square is called New Square, and considering it was built in 1625 is anything but. The square has changed so little since Dickens' day that in the 1980s it was used as the setting for the TV dramatisation of Bleak House.
Stick to your...
Lincoln's Inn Fields is the largest public square in London. It was laid out in the 1630s under the initiative of the speculative builder and contractor William Newton. The grounds, which had remained private property, were acquired by London County Council in 1895 and opened to the public by its chairman Sir John Hutton the same year. The square is today managed by the London Borough of Camden and forms part of the southern boundary of that borough with the city of Westminster. Up to the 17th century, cattle were grazed on the fields, which were part of the Holborn grasslands named Percefield and belonged to St Giles's Hospital. Lincoln's Inn Fields was the site in 1683 of the public beheading of Lord William Russell, son of the 1st Duke of Bedford, following his implication in the Rye House plot for the attempted assassination of King Charles II. The executioner was Jack Ketch, who made such a poor job of it that 4 axe blows were required before the head was separated from the body. After the first stroke, Russell looked up and said to him, "Hoot dog, did I give you 10 guineas to use me so inhumanely?" It was also here in Dickens's Barnaby Rudge that the Gordon rioters gathered. The Gordon riots of 1780 were several days of rioting in London motivated by anti-Catholic sentiment. Violence started on the 2nd of June 1780 with the looting and burning of Catholic chapels in foreign embassies. There was no repression until the government finally sent in the army, resulting in an estimated 300 to 700 deaths. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this Dickens tour of London. I hope you've enjoyed it. Also, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see some more. And leave me a comment if you have visited any of these places, or if, like me, they were new to you. I'd be interested to know what you think. So, in the next episode, we will visit some more locations linked to Charles Dickens, and also we will visit the lair of Sweeney Todd.